The Nephilim weren't just giants. They were something so disturbing that the most detailed book in the Bible, the one that measures Noah's Ark plank by plank and records the day every patriarch died, spends only 4 verses on them and then buries them. It never tells you what they really were, where they came from, or why God wiped them off the earth. But there is a book that does. A book the Bible itself quotes, that the first Christians read, and that got left out. And what it reveals about the Nephilim is disturbing enough that you start to understand the silence, who they were, what they did, and what happened to them after their bodies died, because according to that book, that part never ended. Chapter and verse. Here is everything Genesis refused to tell you. It all starts with 4 verses and with what they refuse to explain. Read them once fast, and you slide right past. Read them again, slowly, and you realize the text is handing you something enormous and walking away. Beings called the sons of God came down, took human women, and from those unions giants were born, the men of renown. That is the whole report. The bomb drops, and Genesis changes the subject. Now feel how strange that is. This is the book that measures the ark down to the cubit, that names every patriarch and how many years he lived, that even records the day each one died. Nothing escapes it. But the race born right before the flood, who they were, where they came from, why they had to be erased. About that, this same book goes quiet. It goes mute exactly where it should say the most. That is not an oversight. That is a hole the size of an entire race. And here is the bomb. The book that fills that hole, the Book of Enoch, is not some cursed apocryphal forgery. It is quoted inside your own Bible. Open the letter of Jude, the brother of Jesus, verse 14. There is a prophecy there, and Jude tells you who it came from, Enoch. The same words, word for word. A man who walked with Jesus quoted Enoch the way you would quote a prophet. The early church read this book, and then it got left out. It did not vanish because it was a lie. It vanished while being quoted. So the answer to Genesis's silence is sitting right there. But before we open it, there is a question that has split scholars for 2,000 years, and you have to answer it first. Who exactly were these sons of God? Before we go any further, you have to pick a side because there are 2 answers, and they lead to completely different videos. Here is what is at stake. If the sons of God were just men, this is a moral story, sad but human-sized. If they were angels, this is a supernatural invasion and everything changes. In the first reading, nothing comes down from heaven. Sons of God are men. The godly line of Seth marrying into the corrupt line of Cain, faith draining away generation after generation until almost no one was left clean. No angel, no hand too large resting on the rock. And this reading has real weight. Jesus himself said angels do not marry. Matthew 22 verse 30. In heaven no one marries. They are all as the angels. If angels do not marry, angels do not father children. It is the version most churches preach to this day, and it is not foolish. But there is a second reading, and it is older. Here the sentence is literal. Something comes down, and it was not supposed to be here. And the people who read it this way were not fringe. They were the Jewish rabbis from before Christ, the first Christians, the fathers of the church. Open the book of Job. There the exact same phrase, sons of God, clearly means the beings of heaven, standing before God. And it does not stay in the Old Testament. In the New, both Jude and Peter write about angels who left their own place, crossed a line they were never allowed to cross, and are held in chains in the dark, waiting for judgment. 2 authors of your own Bible talking about angels who fell, not about a bad marriage. Notice the sizes do not match. Only Men gives you a small, sad story. Angels gives you a border of heaven broken open, and then drowning the whole world stops looking like an overreaction and starts to make sense. 2,000 years, and nobody has closed this fight. I am not going to pretend to. But the oldest voices, the ones closest to it, landed on the angels. And if they were right, there is a book that does not stop at who. It tells you what they did, starting with a mountain. But the Watchers were only the trigger. What was born from those unions, and the size those creatures reached, is where the earth starts to collapse. And we still have not touched the question I opened at the start: what was left of them? If they were angels, the next question is simple. What exactly did they do when they came down? And this is where Enoch tells you what Genesis will not, because it was not just angels sinned. They taught us things, and what they taught explains why the world became what it became. The crime was not only genetic, it was a crime of knowledge. 200 of them gathered on the peak of a mountain. Before they did anything, they swore an oath. Their leader, Semjaza, knew it was forbidden, and he made all 200 bind themselves together so no one could back out. They all fall together, or no one falls. Then they came down. Enoch calls that mountain Hermon, and those beings the Watchers. And that name is not only Enoch's, it is in the book of Daniel, chapter 4. It is in your Bible. They did not come down only for the women, they came with baggage. One of them, Azazel, took the men and taught them to turn metal into a blade, how to forge the sword, how to build the weapon. The same afternoon, humanity learned to kill in a way it did not know that morning. And the same Azazel turned to the women and taught them to adorn themselves, the paint, the jewelry, the art of being impossible to look away from. It was not vanity, it was power, beauty and war entering the world on the same day by the same hand. Others taught sorcery and how to read the future in the stars. Hold on to one thing here because it comes back at the very end. The impulse to hand humanity a power it was never ready to hold. Remember that. But the Watchers were just the cause. The effect, what was born from them, is the part that broke the world. So what exactly was born from that crossing? Not what you are picturing. You have an image in your head, a huge man, 8, 9 feet, muscle and menace. Forget it, because here is the real question, and it is not how tall were they. A 9-foot man is rare. It is impressive. It is not a reason to drown the entire planet. Nobody erases humanity over a few big men. A tall man does not explain the flood. What explains the flood is this: they were not big men at all. They were a different category, a force that was never supposed to exist. The Book of Enoch, chapter 7, tells what they did. They ate. They ate everything, the crops, the herds, and when nothing was left, they turned on people. They ate people. They drank blood. The thing meant to be the crown of creation became the thing devouring creation from the inside. Next to them, Enoch says, ordinary men were like grasshoppers. That is not a big man. That is the world being consumed by something that should never have set foot here. The sizes Enoch gives, 300 cubits, which would be a 40-story building walking, even the people who defend the book call hyperbole, the ancient way of saying bigger than you can count, the way we say we waited an eternity in line. The number is not the point. The number is just evidence of the terror. Michael Heiser, who spent his life on these texts, put it in one line: the problem with the Nephilim was never the height. It was the nature. But if these things were real, flesh and bone, one question shows up on its own. Where are the bones? Let's stop the story and face the biggest objection head on. If there were giants, where are the skeletons? Because this is the doubt that makes most people close the video. No bone in a museum, no confirmed skeleton anywhere on Earth, so is this not all just a myth? Two things have to come off the table first. Those photos of a skull the size of a truck, the ones that circle the group chats every month. Fake, all of them. Most came out of a Photoshop contest in 2002, and the fraud is old. In 1869, a stone giant was buried in a New York field and fooled half the country before it cracked. Take them off the table. And gigantism as a disease? The tallest man who ever lived passed 8'11", but he was sick, alone, could barely walk, and died young because his own body destroyed him. That is a tragic medical case. It is not a race of warriors ruling nations for generations. But here is the thing the missing bones do not touch. Bone turns to dust, especially in a world the Bible says was scoured by a flood that dragged everything away. What survives a flood is not the skeleton, it is the memory. And the argument was never resting on one bone. It rests on multiple ancient sources that never met, describing the same thing. And the Bible does not treat these beings like a campfire story. It treats them as a threat, serious enough that God decided to drown the world. Which leaves the real question: what did they have that made starting over from zero the only way out? Now hold this contradiction. If the flood scrubbed the earth clean, why does the Bible keep naming giants centuries later? The Anakim, Og, Goliath. And why did Jesus say the days of Noah would come back? This is where the ancient story touches your present. To understand the judgment, you have to see that it was never about people being bad. It was about something much bigger being attacked. Why erase the entire world? Not a city, not a nation, the whole planet underwater. There have always been wicked people. If wickedness alone were enough, it would have ended long before. There has to be a reason the size of that act. There is. Back in Eden, God made a promise. From a woman from the human line would come the one who breaks the power of evil. He had to be human, real flesh, a bloodline that had to reach him intact. Now look at the Watchers from that angle. Their crime was not only weapons and forbidden doors. It was contaminating the blood, mixing the human line with something not human, generation after generation, until almost no one was left who could carry the promise. If the mixture took everyone, the promise died before it was born. The target was never sin in general. The target was the promise. That is why the text says Noah was blameless in his generations. The same word used for an animal pure enough to offer no mixture, no contamination. Noah was not saved only for being righteous. He was saved because his blood was still clean, the last man carrying the line intact. The flood was not a tantrum. It was surgery, cutting away what was already rotten to save the little that could still be saved. And it was not rushed. The Bible records 120 years of warning, Noah building in plain sight, time for anyone to turn. And what the text says God felt was not rage. It was grief, the pain of being forced to do something terrible to stop something worse. The flood cleaned it. But did it settle it? Because centuries later, when Moses' spies walked into Canaan, the fear came back with the same name. If the flood solved the problem, it did not. And the Bible hands you that in a 5-word phrase. If only 8 people stepped off the ark and Noah's blood was clean, how did the thing cross the water? Look again at Genesis 6, verse 4. The giants were on the earth in those days, and also after that. After that. The Bible admits, in passing, that the giants came back after the flood. How? The chilling answer people raise is that it did not take much. The text calls Noah pure. It says nothing about his sons' wives. One daughter-in-law carrying a trace of that old line is one crack, and through the crack the thing crossed the flood, hidden inside the very ark meant to erase it. It is a hypothesis, not a verdict, but it explains what comes next. Because it does come back. Moses' spies return from Canaan terrified. The report is in Numbers 13. The people there were so big the spies felt like grasshoppers. Not one freakish man, a whole people, the Anakim. And then the case still argued today. Goliath, whose height changes with the manuscript. 6 cubits and a span in the traditional Hebrew, nearly 10 feet. 4 cubits in the older Greek and the Dead Sea Scrolls. closer to 6.5. Both are written down. Which is real? That fight I will leave to you. There is King Og, whose bed ran about 13 feet, though some say it was a basalt coffin, not a bed, and coffin size is not body size. Fair. But the text kept the number because it was off the scale. The Bible does not close the giants at the flood. It leaves echoes of them all through history. And it is not only the Hebrews who remembered, it is the whole world. Before the final piece, step out of the Bible with me for a second, because the whole world seems to remember these creatures. If it was only a Hebrew story, why did the Sumerians, the Egyptians, dozens of cultures that never met, keep the same memory? Coincidence, or the echo of something real? In ancient Babylon, the records speak of the Apkallu, also called Oans, sages who, according to the historian Berossus, came out of the waters before a great flood to teach knowledge to mankind. Look at the shape of that. Beings from outside, handing over knowledge man did not have right before a flood. It is the same skeleton as Enoch's watchers, two cultures that never met, holding the same memory. Now, some people pull this thread way too far. They say these were the Anunnaki of the Sumerians, that Nephilim watchers and Anunnaki are one race with three names, and that they built the pyramids. And a lot of that traces back to one author, Sitchin. I have to be straight. The scholars who actually read Sumerian say it does not hold up, there is no evidence, and the engineering of the age already explains the stones without a giant. I am putting both ends on the table. You decide. But strip out the speculation and what is left is still striking. The same pattern in cultures that never spoke. Beings from outside, forbidden knowledge, destruction. Even when the body disappears, the memory stays. But the most important piece is still missing, and it is the one no other channel shows you. The flood took the giants' bodies. The Book of Enoch says what lived inside them did not drown. The bodies died in the flood, but what about what lived inside them? This is the answer to the question I opened 20 minutes ago, and it changes how you read the entire Bible. Think about what the giants were, half from heaven, half from earth. A creature creation was never built to hold. So when one died, when the flesh rotted and the bone turned to dust, the thing inside it had nowhere to go. Heaven was not home. The ground would not take it, so it stayed. Enoch describes it in chapters 15 and 16. The spirit that comes out of the dead giant does not die. It wanders, hungry for the flesh it lost, the weight, the presence in the world, and the only thing that eases that hunger is to climb inside another body. That is where demons come from, not a separate species, not the angels who fell. According to Enoch, the unclean spirits the Bible shows tormenting and possessing people are what was left of that race, the spirit of a creature that was never supposed to exist, with no body and no destiny, wandering until judgment. And this does not fight the Bible. Scripture itself speaks of the spirits in prison from the days of Noah, and Peter confirms it. Enoch is not inventing a new origin. He is filling the blank Genesis left. And why are any still loose? The Book of Jubilees answers in chapter 10. After the flood, the spirits were so many that God ordered most of them locked away, but left a fraction free under a chief named Mastema, a sieve for humanity. So they never really left. They stayed. And if Enoch is right about that, then the thing Jesus said, that the days of Noah would come back, is not reassuring at all. If their spirits are still here, then the question stops being history and becomes, what now? Jesus promised the days of Noah would return. If that is what the days of Noah were, heaven crossing into earth, a bloodline altered by something not human, then his warning is not pointing at a distant past, it is pointing at your door. He said it in Matthew 24. As it was in the days of Noah, so it will be. And there is a strange line in Daniel 2, that in the last kingdom they would mingle themselves with the seed of men. iron trying to bond with clay, that people today read against gene editing, transhumanism, even the aliens, that may be the same old spirits wearing a new name. And then the detail that gave me chills when I connected it. The Watchers came down on Mount Hermon, that was ground zero, where the oath was sworn and the border was crossed. Centuries later, Jesus took his disciples to a city at the foot of that exact mountain, Caesarea Philippi, and it was there, standing on the ground of the crime, that he said, "The gates of hell shall not prevail." That was not an accident. That was standing on ground zero of the fall and declaring to its face that what was broken would be restored. And I know the skeptic's reflex. Every generation thinks it is the last one. But notice, Jesus did not point to Sodom or to a war. He pointed to the days of Noah. And you just saw what the days of Noah really were. So here is where it lands. You just saw that the Nephilim were never only an old legend, and that, if Enoch is right, what came out of them never left. Which leaves one question hanging: if those spirits still move, then what exactly are you up against every day without knowing it? I will keep digging into that. But first, I want to hear from you, the one fight this whole video circled. Were the sons of God fallen angels, or were they men of the line of Seth, like most churches preach? Pick a side and tell me the one verse that convinced you. And if you made it all the way here, type Hermon in the comments so I know. Genesis buried a lot. I'm not done digging.